Hello and welcome. It's Justin Johnson. I'm on the Academic Integrity of Arts and Humanities, which is History and Politics. We're on the module DD211, Understanding History and Politics, Ideas and Institutions in the Modern World. We're on chapter 17, The Globalisation of World Politics, page 154. Make sure, if you're reading, young adults, young teenagers, mature adults, OAPs, you want to better your life chances, your life goals, your life aspirations. Will make that change. Don't sit here slurping about. Make something for yourself. Get into adult learning, university. When you read, make sure you reference your reading so the listener and the tutor knows where you're getting your source information from. But the book is first published at the Open University, Walton Hall, Milton Keynes. It's first published 2015, second edition 2022. Here we go. Page 154. Experience under Japanese colonial rule. If relations were to take a bad turn to the point of hostilities, the US might well have to step in. In its role as a guarantor of Japan's secretary, a position it has maintained since its defeat of Japan in the Second World War. Page 155. Do you know how many books I've read over the last 4 years? I couldn't even add them up on both hands and both feet. I've read absolutely billions now, hundreds of books. Page 155. I've even written 5 books in that meantime. Anyway, page 155. International Relations Theory and Globalisation. The theoretical approaches discussed above gave some examples of how they might help us to understand events or problems in politics on the world stage. What we can do now is use the approaches to appraise the idea of globalisation. Think of these as a different theoretical lens through which to view a particular issue, problem, or idea. As you will see, some will emphasise certain features while ignoring others. As with the globalisation debate, there is not necessarily a right or wrong answer here. It is about using the approach that does the best job of explaining things for you. Realism. Most realists would argue that globalisation does not change the fact that the division of the world into territorial states is still the predominant feature of the world politics. Furthermore, they argue that the globalisation that has occurred has been primarily Western experience and is not necessarily a universal phenomenon as such. Realists tend to agree with a special view that globalisation is overplayed, pointing to high levels of economic independence, for example, in terms of capital flows, trade as a percentage of GDP. Historically, then, we are experiencing now. In addition, a realist perspective might point out that although social and economic interconnectedness may have increased, the states that make up international systems have not necessarily gone through the same process. So thinking back on hyper-globalist argument about the states becoming less important, realists posit that states have maintained their sovereignty and struggle for power between them still continues. A contemporary conflict such as the one between Russia and Ukraine since 2014 gives us a compelling illustration of continuing struggle for power between states. As a result, states maintain the threat of force and seek to balance their power against others. So the international system of states is not necessarily affected in a realist viewpoint. A furthermore argument is that the states will perform the key social, political, and economic functions. They affect people's lives, and sovereign states, after all, are the ones that foster the condition for economic advancement. States can still continue the allegiance of their citizens. Nationalism remains a potent feature of world politics, and war is still likely, despite economic independence. Indeed, economic independence has not prevented wars in the past, so why would it do so in the future? In terms of transnational institutions, while the realists might agree that some of the formal transnational governance may be possible in a rudimentary form, they argue that this is still dependent on a distribution of power. Think of the power of the EU in comparison to the economic community of West African states, the ECO, WAS, and also the distributional power within such organisations. On the latter point, despite its cooperative endeavours and features of government and law that go beyond the state, the EU is still characterised by an uneven distributional power within it. Compare the relative power of Germany and its leadership role in the EU to the power of smaller countries such as Slovenia or Estonia, who arguably do not carry the same clout within the organisation. Liberalism. The realist view lies in stark contrast to that espoused by liberals, which views globalisation as a transformative process of world politics. In opposition to the realist view, liberals hold the states are no longer the central actors. They argue that the power of capital has overtaken that of the state, and that economic and technological interconnectedness result in very different world from one ruled by the states. Liberals might highlight the proliferation of free trade agreement organisations that have come about through globalisation and how they provide developing economies with a means to overcome hardship and modernise their economies. Tied in with this is a view that the diffusion of technology and knowledge helps increase opportunities for poor countries. Liberals often point to economic growth as the primary road to development. The major increase in living standards and GDP of the Asian tiger economies, Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, and Taiwan, since instituting neoliberal economic reforms, are often held up as examples and reinforce such viewpoint, although to do so ignores the protective practices of such economies on their road to development. The liberals' perspective of globalisation is not all one-sided, though. There is also a current radical liberalism that seeks to challenge the neoliberalism defence of global economic institutions. This view points to the fact that economic liberty and political equality are often opposed. It also highlights the democratic deficit at a global level by asking who elects the members of these global economic institutions and how they're representative of normal people. We may have seen increasing democraticization of states, but this does not necessarily involve democratization of the society of states. The argument is therefore that if there is a greater interconnectedness as a product of globalization, it needs to be managed through democratic institutions rather than those that just serve an unelected elite. Constructivism. Constructivists highlight how globalization is often presented as an outside or external force that cannot be challenged or shaped. They do not agree with such an assumption, as it means that leaders cannot play a role in shaping and challenging globalization. They claim that people and politicians are capable of shaping globalization, particularly through cross-national social movements. Constructivists argue that our understanding of what constitutes a legitimate world order is subject to change, and that is dependent on prevailing norms in the world politics. They point out that states will adopt certain practices because of their international standing or acceptance, for example. States that gain independence from the Soviet Union and wish to interrogate with the EU, such as the Baltic states, set themselves on a course for democracy and economic reform upon gaining independence. The socialisation of states is seen as important to enable states to act as members of certain club. This is because constructivists believe that states' behaviour is shaped by international norms, for example, adhering to accepted norms on human rights, trade or citizenship. Globalisation has been shaped by values and ideas of different political actors, but they states or otherwise, and it has in turn helped shape and form new identities. In this sense, constructivists might focus on the idea of globalisation as its key feature, rather than the technological process that are often seen as underpinning it. For example, the creation of discourse of globalisation and their effect in influencing the decisions taken by actors, and in the way that processes of globalisation are communicated and coordinated. 𝕦𝕠𝕕𝕚𝕚, 2005. In the conclusion, This chapter has presented a range of different ideas about global politics, from processes to theoretical perspectives, in charting the development of the world state system, beginning with the Peace of Westphalia. It discussed how the rise of empires fostered greater interconnectedness across the globe, be it through war and conquest or trade and discovery. Paradoxically, it was the development of that state system, married with the expansion of colonial empires, that laid the foundation for what we now understand of globalization. The post Second World War order brought not only the Cold War, but also the establishment and, some might say, eventual victory of the US-led global economic order with liberal commitment to market capitalism at its core. Globalization is now given across numerous academic disciplines in the social sciences, which have sought to explain claims about a seemingly shrinking and increasingly interconnected. How you doing, dear? I'll be with you. Give me 1 minute. I'll be with you. In transport and communication, some have argued that this signified, these are saying, on B3 Sunday, the end of the state as we know it, as we move towards a single global market economy. However, some political scientists have questioned the validity of such claims, arguing that the transformative aspects of the contemporary globalization debates have been overplayed, particularly in the economic sphere, and that the world is far less interconnected in economic terms than it was during the age of the empire. If we can see the feature of global politics as seemingly pervasive as that of globalization can be contested, the way in which global politics is analysed and interpreted by scholars is also important. The three key theoretical perspectives that are introduced from international relations are not only useful in analysing events and relationships of national, regional, or global significance, but can also put to use in addressing and interpreting globalisation to boil the debate down to one between globalisation signifying the end of the state, and on one hand, and the state being immune to the pressures of globalisation on the other, only leads to a sterile and potentially polemical debate. It is in the nuances, myriad of actors and issues, where one can start to explore and ultimately interpret what the study of global politics is all about. I'm going to leave that there. Colette, are you still in the building or have you gone?